Okay, so I'll maybe introduce you to. This is Joanne Avison, you guys. She is so stellar. She's like one of my favorite humans. And Kaila June, do you say it Kaila?
Kaila.
Kaila, thank you. All right, and we are here with Kaila June, Joanne Avison, and Christine Wischke. And what we're going to talk about today is the concept of tensegrity and biotensegrity and how these principles might be useful for people today in our current situation. So Joanne, are you okay to start, and you can go take us into what is?
Yeah, I mean, you know me, I can talk about biotensegrity for hours. So what's key?
Well, let's pretend people have never heard of this concept of tensegrity, let alone biotensegrity.
Well, tensegrity is a combination of tensile integrity. And basically how that arose was that, oh my God, I don't know where to start. We inherited from our forefathers, our ancestors, and we can map this history quite distinctly and beautifully, a model of the movement of the human form that's basically 2D. And we've been under a 2D spell for 400 years. And I call it a spell because it's had us spellbound to describing how the body is bound together in 2 dimensions. And it's not.
So nice.
And that's not even rocket science. That's just the art of stating what we call the obvious.
We're on stick figures.
This thing is round. This is rounded. These little tubes called fingers are rounded, and this tube called an arm or a leg or a torso, it's in the round. So it's a minimum of 3D. And actually it starts to get quite complicated because it forms itself, it's self-assembling in the round, and it moves through itself to become itself, self-assembled. So how I say it is the architect self-assembles the architecture through which to express the architect.
Oh, that's so good.
Supposed to do your head in, because we can't do this with the reasoning mind. The reasoning mind is the foundation of the spell under which we live, that we are made of 2D things called levers. So this may look like a lever when it's a shadow on the wall, but it doesn't make it a lever. It's just not. A lever's a 2-bar open chain, and there's no open chains in the body, and there's no 2-bar anything. So they just can behave in a 2-bar manner, but it's a spell, and we've been under it for a long time. And that spell is broken once we understand tensegrity. And basically the shift is from 90-degree angle things to angles based on 60 degrees, triangles and spheres. And a sphere is in fact an icosahedron at a certain frequency. And you have to take my word for that at this point. But this is the Tensegrity Icosahedron. And basically what this describes, and pedagogically it's used and abused and misunderstood and sometimes understood, but basically what it describes is an object, a hard matter object, because this has been man-made, right? That shows 2 forces, one of tension and one of compression, exemplified in a structure that is whole. So it doesn't have a beginning and an end as such. And the person that designed this was Tom Flemons. It's called a Manhattan toy company, Tensegrity, and it was Tom Flemons' design. And he got his inspiration from Kenneth Snelson, who came up with this concept of tension compression combined, and he called it floating compression systems. And Buckminster Fuller, who had done a huge amount of work before he was Kenneth Snelson's tutor, working on the basis that round things relate to icosahedrons and 60-degree angles, triangles and so on, and that's a whole aspect of geometry that we go into when we go into biotensegrity in depth or tensegrity in depth. And he called them floating compression systems. And the reason he called them floating compression systems, and this was quite important, was that the compression element pushes out on the tensional element that pushes in, and thereby creating a third thing out of those two things because of their architecture. So in other words, you can have sticks and you can have strings. Imagine I had a string here, and you can combine them in all sorts of ways. But the force transmission, this is not a model of forms, this is a model of forces. You have to remember that. The force transmission that allows this to be the way that it is in this particular geometry gives us something that holds the thing open by the thing that holds it closed, by the thing that holds it open, by the thing that holds it closed. So we have a perpetual state, if you will, but it's completely changeable, because if it's designed in balance, it can deform and reform.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tensegrity, because this is made out of hard matter. And so in hard matter, there are two of them. There's two things here. There's wooden dowels. Well, I know they've got bubbles on the end, but they're just different shape. Two materials, let's say, and string that is elastic, which is very misleading, but we'll get to that. And so this looks like a model, and is taken as a model of bones and soft tissues. That would be incorrect. This is a model of the forces which demonstrate how bones hold tissue open as a volume. That's what you need to take from this. But this doesn't represent bones and tissues as such. It represents the forces between every cell within a cell and within the organism. Because what happens is when we translate this into biotensegrity, which was the name that Steve Levin gave. So Buckminster Fuller took this floating compression and named it tensegrity for tensile integrity. He added the tensional forces to the compression forces. So we are still under the spell that we are stacked bodies. We have a spinal column, as if the bones of the spine are stacked on each other, for example, or the lower leg bones are stacked on the foot, which has the upper leg bones and then the pelvis, and then the legs carry the body as a passenger, which is stacked bones with the head balanced on. So it's complete nonsense, because otherwise, if we turn upside down in a handstand, which we frequently do in our yoga practice, or if we're hanging upside down to look down on the floor and see if something fell off the table and ran away, you want to catch it, your head would fall off if you were a compression structure. It's that simple.
Oh, and can you describe a compression structure just a little bit in case someone doesn't know, like if we describe like the cement or like brick building.
So think of a house which has columns in it, and those columns, those piers, if you will, are holding up the building. So in standard architecture of hard matter house building, you have columns to support, or columns under a bridge to support the weight of that which is above. So the traditional thing is the obelisk, which has a bigger base than it has a top, and it's constructed vertically at 90 degrees to the ground, and it is stacked one bit on top of the other. So we have this vision of the spine as a stacked column, whereby the sacrum and the lumbar spine are bigger than the thoracic spine, which is bigger than the cervical spine, so that we have this lovely column idea, and we call it the spinal column. But it couldn't be a column, because if you have a column in a house, and as you can see, there's a column behind me here. Can you see that? That's my fireplace, but it's acting as a column. And if that column tilted, my whole house would fall down. Just remembering the day my son decided he didn't want a fireplace in his bedroom, he just started hacking it.
Oh dear.
It was one of those moments, when you're a mother and you stand here and go, what's that noise? And there's trouble. And you go upstairs and your son's decided he doesn't like the fireplace in his room. And he's just back. No, Ben, this is a structural part of that. He was only little. This is a structural part of the house, honey. Let's have a conversation about architecture, you and me. And he's like, mallet poised, I can't believe. I'm just remembering that fireplace is underneath the one he was trying to remove. Oh my God, it was one of those moments. Anyway, so that would have threatened the entire structural integrity of my house, because it's a compression structure. Right. And please God, the earth underneath it never shifts. But we move around, so we must be different. Mm-hmm. And what happens is we inherited the various people, the spell that we're under, the collective spell. But what happened was René Descartes did a turf deal, and this is key for what we're going to talk about. René Descartes did a turf deal with the Pope in the 17th century, where he asked permission to dissect human bodies post-death, obviously. And this was illegal in the church. It had been illegal for many hundreds of years. And so the Pope sanctioned that if the church retained jurisdiction over the invisible forces of the mind and the emotions and the soul and the spirit, they stayed under the jurisdiction of the church, so that the church could make sure that the soul, that salvation took place if necessary, and the person went to the right place, you know, heaven, hell, purgatory, whatever it was they were supposed to do, that the Catholic Church took care of that. So René Descartes was granted access to the body under those circumstances. But in order to continue under this lawful sanction, remember, things were very, very different 300-400 years ago. Culturally, education wasn't available to the masses. Education was something that happened to the clergy or the wealthy, and you had to have a patron. And people like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and even Descartes had to have some sort of sanction from the church or the educational authorities, or a patron that paid for them to be educated. So all these laws were completely different. And in order to do that, what happened in that moment in Western history was that the mind and the body, the sensory awareness, the subtle invisible forces, were segregated from the form. So when we say in our language, oh, I was moved by that person, or that person moved my soul when they said blah, 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 we use the same word, but we put the rules of movement under the rules of hard matter physics and levers and 90-degree angles and columns. And then we don't really know what to do with the movement processes of feeling emotionally moved. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about motion in this lot, and we call it biomechanics, as if that biomechanical explanation for this two-dimensional column structure or three-dimensional column structure based on hard matter architecture can be described as if it moves mechanically. And that was also partly due to Descartes. It's also Borelli and several others, but Descartes was an horologist, and he taught about clocks. He learned about clocks, he studied clocks. And because clocks can move themselves after they've been wound up, they are self-motivated. He referred to them as an automaton. Now, autos means self, and maton, that part, came from motivation. So automaton was a self-motivated thing. So it was his way of explaining self-motivation. But awareness didn't have to be explained, because that was the jurisdiction of the church. That wasn't his job. And through that rift and that segregation and the power of his arguments, which was really something, Descartes' Meditations is something to read, we began to lose this sense of what I call the bioemotional living form, that you can't segregate those things. And I don't know if you've become aware of this, but every other school is called the embodied school of, or embodiment. And we are embodied. Mm-hmm. Can't not be. We'd be dead if we weren't. Because the embodiment signifies the very animus that animates this form, the absence of which means we're deceased. It's a cadaver. And we're all going to die. So let's just get over that little upset. We're all going to die. We know that. So, and I'm not making that a bad thing or a good thing. I'm not commenting. God knows in the current time that I've wept buckets, and I still am. And that's partly what we're talking about, how we pick ourselves up from the sheer weight of the sadness of the situation that we're in. How dare we? But at the same time, it's something we all know. You know, the joke they make, death and taxes are the two things no one gets to avoid. But what we've had so far is this solid rock block on block theory behind what is actually a round thing. And this is a sock, obviously, with balls in it, representing the third division of the embryo, in fact. But if you can see every one of the balls in this model, if the sock squeezes them as the membrane does, squeezes and pushes the balls together, but the growing balls and the dividing balls and the multiplying balls push back out into the membrane. That is what this is. This represents this. This is the forces that this is under, because I can't squeeze any harder than that, because the inside pushes out while the outside pushes in. And this is a very fine balance that we call homeostasis. And when we lose that homeostasis, we get models like this one, which doesn't reform. It's lost its bounce, because it's lost its homeostatic balance. So this has now become, it's lost its tensional part. So this is now a compression structure almost. It's got much more compression than tension. And in fact, we have to be careful, because a lot of people are now adapting this language to mean that we've got to look at our tensile properties as if we haven't got compression properties. Oh yes, we have both. And this is where I think it's a fabulous model of what's going on at the moment, in that we emotionally, the hardness, the resilience, the endurance to just keep going, to pick ourselves up and listen to the news and think, oh my God, what's the point? That's a weighty, compressive thought. And somehow we've got to add and the word is misused, tension usually means upset, right? So we've got to add the tension, the attention, the intention to resolve, to overcome, to find endurance, to keep going. And the reason I wanted to say all that at the beginning to move us forward is that biotensegrity applies to this, living things. So this is not a biotensegrity model. This is a tensegrity model of biotensegral forces in a very single moment of time. Biotensegrity is made of one fabric, not two, one. And it's relentlessly wet, sensory, breathing, aware, conscious mass of shifting paradigms. So it's a great big huge difference. So when people call these biotensegrity models, they don't get it.
Right. Bio implies living.
It's a tricky thing though, Christine, because in the cadaveric lab, when we've got soft fixed dissection, it was biotensegral. It still is tensegral. Technically, it's no longer biotensegral because it's not self-animated. But we get into a pickle, because it's still operating by the laws of biotensegrity.
Right, right.
Otherwise, what you're saying is when someone's anesthetized, the fact that they have life force keeps them biotensegral. And when they are on the other side of that and the animus has gone and it's a soft fixed dissection, that their properties have changed. It's a very difficult domain of terminology. But if we leave that complexity out for now, for a language of convenience, what we can talk about is the fact that this represents two materials showing you how forces work, which leaves a lot of people like, what? And this represents those two forces moving through multiple forms made of the same fabric, which is obviously the fascia.
Right. Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say too, like, is that the balance of the two is what allows the architecture to be what it is. If this were a compression structure, it would be, we could say it would be like my yoga blocks that I'm going to make a tower out of.
That's right. And if you tilt that tower, what's going to happen?
Right. But what I find really fascinating is when you add in that other element, which is tension, and you balance them together in such a way that the forces are in balance with it's like another dimension of the it's a multi-dimensional architecture now, versus this is kind of like this like two-dimensional thing. And this is,
I would argue that this is three-dimensional and this is four in a way. And I get myself into a pickle here. But basically, this is a 3D map of the forces in a volume.
Beautiful.
And this is the volume they represent. because it's relentlessly round things. These are not spheres. They are very high frequency icosahedrons.
I love
And
that.
what happened, the spell was broken partly by Isaac Newton. We had something in our world called geometry. And we had beautiful shapes in space moving in multi-dimensions, the cosmos. They had telescopes by that time, and not microscopes, or maybe they had microscopes. But the thing I'm talking about is the ability to see the cosmos and the spheres of the planets moving, and the sun and the moon was plausible, was possible. How do round things move in space? And this fascinated Newton. As we know, he's called the man who discovered gravity. Of course, he didn't discover it, it was already there. He animated the distinction of gravity. He made sense of it. And his fascination was how round things move around in space at speed. And in order to calculate that, what Newton did was invent calculus, because the difficulty they had was describing to each other what they meant by a bell curve moving round itself and moving in space, and how much space did it take up, and what velocity did it have, and what mass did it have. And these were very complex calculations in multi-dimensional visions that relied on imagination. So in order to take the imaginal muscle out of it, the invisible ability to imagine, Newton came up with calculus, which became the language of volume, the symbols of volumes. But it reduced the vision of volumes to a very technical algebraic equation. Now, it's genius. Trust me, the genius in it is unbelievable and incomprehensible. But what it did was it reduced us to our formulaic explanation. And since then, physicists speak in fluent calculus. And we have to kind of find a way for the common man to pop back into volume. Because with the reduction to calculus came the reduction to 2D. Because calculus is a two-dimensional, it physically takes up 2D space on a flat page.
Got it.
Ink on white paper.
Right.
And this is a multi-dimensional page in the round, in which your life story is written. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. Yeah, love it.
So we lost this ability to imagine, which we needed, because they were all arguing with each other as to what they meant. And it gave a common language across cultures and across language barriers. You know, pi is pi. It doesn't matter whether you're in India or England. Pi, you divide any circumference of any circle anywhere on any planet by its diameter, and you get pi. End of. Nothing to discuss. That's it. Brilliant. That's genius. Doesn't matter whether you speak French, German, Dutch, English, Chinese, Mandarin. It doesn't matter. You get the same result. So by finding this common denominator, we had calculus, but we forgot geometry. And geometry is the living animated form. Now, Kaila, June, you were talking about embodiment before we came online. So I'm inviting you to speak to that, because this pops us into 3D, like we've, do you know what I mean? Like we've come out the page. You were talking about that. Go.
Well, it's interesting that you connect that into geometry as you were talking, which, by the way, I always learn something new when you speak, Joanne, and the layers and the depth of how we just kind of need to keep immersing ourselves in this, right? And it just gets richer and richer and clearer. So I'm feeling that way right now. But I wanted to just kind of mention how I first came across the icosahedron and this geometry, and it happened fortunately through movement study. So, some of our somatic pioneers, two of the first that I learned from, not directly from them, but their work, was Rudolf Laban and Bartenieff. And Rudolf Laban was this incredible visionary.
Yeah.
And he was fascinated with the icosahedron, as our human kinesphere. And he, there's pictures of him, and I've always wanted to build one, but basically human-size icosahedrons, and he and his dancers would move into these geometric shapes, open walls, so basically just the structures, just the edges. So the 20 triangles were delineated. And this is where some of his harmonics or movement scales came from, was reaching right through these different spaces. And what I'd like to say about that is there was something for me in exploring the geometry of possibilities that I had but did not know. Because even in our bodies, we can get quite linear, right? And so there's this way in which geometry does open up expansive, infinite possibilities. And I think it can happen in a lot of different ways.
Well, I'm gonna point to one word that you used there, and that was know. And we talked about this a lot, Christine. Let's just pretend we've got 3 ways of knowing. I mean, we've got multiple ways of knowing. We're multidimensional. I don't think we're 2D. I don't think we're 3D. I think we're multidimensional. We're multisensory. And because we now know the fascia is the largest sensory organ of the body, and we have research showing that what was originally thought to be 100 million sensory neurons in the fascia is now more like 2.5 times that, and so on. We can support that with research and so on, because we're asking different questions. But here's the thing. The key to what you just said was no. Now, Laban and Feldenkrais and Alexander and van der Scarabelli and Ida Rolf, they all had, Ida Rolf wasn't so much of a mover, I don't think, but she knew it was needed. So she, Judith Aston was her colleague that brought Rolfing movement to being. That we have a way of knowing that is intellectual, and we have a way of knowing that is instinctive, that moves. They go together. That instinctive movement, they go together. And we have a way of knowing that is intuitive. And they operate, in the mystery schools we learn, they operate at different speeds. And one of the things that's happened in the last 400 years is we've become very, very focused on our intellectual knowing. Can we put the information together? Can we remember the origins and insertions of the muscles because they move the bones as levers? Well, they don't, and they don't have origins and insertions. This is a mythology. We cut those into place. You've been in the lab with me, Christine. Where aren't muscles attached? I'm not saying they don't have a thickening at the place we call the origin of the insertion, but that is a language of convenience to give us a map to guide us as to where we are on the territory, and it is valid as such. Let me reiterate that. It is valid as such. When you are a clinical anatomist guiding a surgeon in bloodless cutting, for example, to minimize the effect or the impact on a patient, you need to know where you are and why you're there and what depth, and you need coordinates. Abso-friggin-lutely. But that's not how we move. We move instinctively as a whole. So our instinctive movement knowing has a very different language. And I think this is something you wanted to talk about, Christine, is that when our clients sense something or feel something through motion, and this is what Laban, I mean, my God, I've come across so many, is it Laban or Laban?
Laban.
Laban. It's what every single person I meet who's studied with that school is in a different league. They have such a sense of their intuitive awareness of space. It's palpable. You can see it, walks in the door with them. And so we have this inner sphere just inside the kinosphere. And what happens, I think, is that depending on which way you're looking, so if you're moving, you're looking out, but you're moving from inside out. And then when you come in, you draw in and you're moving from the outside in. And our ability to do this in the round is our instinctive knowing. And we don't give credit to that because we can't describe it. We don't have a language for it. We don't know what to call it. And I don't know about you, but I know I have clients, I have movement students, I have teachers that I teach and teachers that teach me. And we all, it's like, well, it feels lighter. No, it doesn't. It feels heavier. No, it feels bigger. No, it feels softer. And we come up with these kinesthetic words because we can't actually intellectually describe what's going on, because this is outside of the reasoning mind. It's in the sensory, we're trying to make sense of it. And you make sense of movement by moving. or keeping still, which is another expression of movement. And you said the word knowing, and without knowing intellectually, but oh my God, you know. And I've been teaching this work for 25 years, and everywhere I go, everywhere people go, oh my God, it's like, thank you. I knew that I knew, but I didn't want to say that I knew in case I sounded like I didn't know, and somebody gave me an anatomy test. And I said, I'm not here to teach you that anatomy. I'm not here to teach you the map. I'm here to facilitate your understanding of what you already know, because you were born doing it. You self-assembled this thing that you call you. And you already know how to do that. You know instinctively. And intuitively then takes us into another whole realm, which is the prescribed, the present moment, the moment the moment that we're in, the one that gives us that sense of anticipation. You know how you know when you're moving that that's not going to be a safe move? And that becomes really keenly tuned when you practice.
Yes.
That's the moving body knowing itself instinctively from moving, such that it reaches a point where it's so present to its movement that it can then sense what's coming in advance.
That's so good.
And that is about tensional integrity. That is about this, because the more finely tuned this is for you in your resonance field, the more subtle the nuances, and that's such a good word, nuance, become. And you on my Facebook page yesterday, I think, or the day before, I posted something that was the Paris Ballet, Corps de Ballet did a thing. Everyone's at home and they're with their kids and they're dancing and practicing in their garages and their bedrooms and their kitchens. It's just divine. And it's just like art moving, dancing, you know? And there's this fine-tuned resonance that is so, and I think we actually all have that somewhere in here. I wish I was as fine-tuned.
We absolutely do. Yeah.
I think we all do. And we know when that resonance is out. This is all I was going to say. Sorry.
Oh, yes. Well, I might call you to come back to resonance, actually. But what you're saying right now is so relevant to what I think I was feeling the call to speak to in these last, maybe about a week ago. I got the sense that when we talk about the compression structures missing, let's say the tension, it's kind of like, well, what Buckminster Fuller was talking about, like if our architecture is a compression only structure, it's like it's missing the tensegrity. So let's add that in and create these architectures that have the combination of two, that are floating compression now. And now this architecture is, I don't know if it's correct to say exponentially stronger, but it feels like the architecture, when it has that additional component and the combination of the two now as this multidimensional architecture, it's
pattern. Don't forget, it's in a particular pattern.
Yes, it's the balance of the two, and then it's the pattern of that it's configured in. And what I get you're saying about the knowing. So when we go to that intuitive knowing and we look at our culture and we look at the way that our culture is set up to revere that layer of intellectual knowing, it's as though it's the same thing as the compression, as sort of revering compression without tension, right? It's like if we're only valuing intellectual knowing, and there's these other layers of knowing underneath that are not talked about or not pulled forward or not highlighted enough, it's like that's another layer of the pop that I think would be really helpful for people right now. That there's a layer of sensing and knowing what's going on in the world right now, that we're picking up on so many intuitively, so many layers of distress and sadness you mentioned earlier, and we're feeling all that underneath. And so I wonder if it's, my whole sense of this conversation is to eventually take our talk into applying these concepts to our mental well-being and our spiritual well-being and even our emotional self, that these concepts apply to all the aspects of being human. And yeah, so I wonder if you could speak to that, or you, Kaila, if you have a sense of that, at this, on a cultural level, how there's certain aspects of the human being that get so importantized, if I can use that as a word, and other aspects that are maybe dismissed or under talked about, or maybe just they're so subtle that they're skipped over, but that those pieces might be particularly valuable right now in our times, particularly on the knowing side of things. But
you know, I often think about this in terms of these actions of being and doing. And, you know, oftentimes this kind of overthinking, kind of highly cognitive, intellectual side is really kind of driven by the need to do and produce and succeed. And, you know, it's like, I think of the cartoon, The Lorax. You guys ever see that?
no,
it's amazing. Oh yeah, it's amazing. But anyhow, this whole thing about this drive for productivity, right?
Yeah.
And really there's a particular kind of depletion that's occurring in this overriding towards success and needing to kind of have something outside of us that is greater than whatever that might be. I mean, this kind of speaks into what you and I had been talking about too, Christine, in terms of nervous system harmony, but this place of being, and what you were speaking to, Joanne, right? For me, it's like, it's this coming back into my self-forming in this moment while I'm informing and relating to the experience of being alive in this environment. It is this kind of sum total of kind of quieting into presence of sorts, right? And oftentimes I think in our culture, this idea of being in that presence is passive and not active and something to be dismissed. It's lazy or it's apathetic because you're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I see that this place of being and presence is actually the restorative medicine in a way, like it's the juice. Right?
Yes.
And what is it then and I think this then speaks directly to what you just asked, Christine, kind of what, you know, culturally maybe do we miss or where do we get lost is the inability, one, to access this being of presence, to access this natural restorative environment that we can always return to. And then how do we take that into our doing? How do we take that into what it is that we are kind of intending or making happen in our lives? It changes the quality.
So much.
And that is so beautifully said, because one of the things I think that happens when we intellectualize and analyze is that we end up being very devoted to or focused on quantitative measures. How many hours did I exercise today? How many meals have I eaten? How many calories have I consumed? Can I get the balance of input and output right so that I'm the right number on the scale and I look right and I'm wearing the right number dress? How many strokes per length did I do in the swimming pool? Am I Olympic level? I'm just reiterating what you just said in quantitative terms. And what I think we're trying to move towards now, and what I think is one of the many silver linings in this situation that we're in, which has changed us as a world forever. We are going to be the people that lived through this, please God. And we are, however we lived through it, however we remember it, whether it involves the loss of loved ones or that I have close friends who've had it and who've come through it. I can't even tell you, you can't make sense qualitatively of what is going on. Nobody can. Right. And, you know, we turn on the television to get the news and our governments are very politely sniping at each other. And I want to get hold of the shadow cabinet and say, sweetheart, don't get mean now, even if you're being nice and spreading treacle on the top. If this was the other way round, it would be the other way round. Why don't you grow up and raise your game? Let's have a real, honest, qualitative support come together as a country. You know, in the UK, they've got this lovely technique where they say, we're here to support the government. We're all on the same side. You know, the enemy is COVID-19. But we're here to make sure that things happen in the right order. We're here to make sure that the organizer, seriously, it feels like there's a qualitative recognition now. You know, we have an upset in the UK because they put out a request for volunteers to help support the national health system, to be drivers as ambulance, you know, bringing people to appointments, doing all kinds of volunteer things. And I think within hours, there were more than 500,000 people.
Oh, wow.
Now we're up in the millions, and people are upset that they haven't been asked, but the volume of responses around the entire country, literally from one corner to the top corners, the bottom corners, and all the way around, that no one had any idea that there were this many connections to make. You know, how we can't knit that fast. And it's so amazing to see the quality of support. I mean, yes, there's exceptions. I had a friend who was yelled at in the park. She's got a very young child and an older son, and they all live together. And they obviously, somebody yelled at them, and it was just so inappropriate and so unnecessary, because it's also turned a lot of people, unfortunately, into pious, judgmental, you know, sneak on my neighbours kind of mentality. That's a real shame, but it's not the majority. And we're all being called upon to qualitatively consider how we live. And
So much so.
I find the other thing that I think we find hard, that you spoke to as well, Kaila, June, about, and so did you, Christine, about, is June your surname or your first name?
It's actually, yeah, it's my second name. So I go by Kaila. Yeah.
Okay, Kaila's okay.
I love it when people say Kaila June, because I mean, it's wonderful to hear too. So
I know that feeling. My father, who I lost last year, used to call me, when he was not cross but very serious, he used to call me Joanne Sarah. And it was like, Dad, what? But anyhow, he didn't tell me off. He was my best. Oh, he's just.
Oh.
And the reason he's come into my mind is that he probably, because I'm sitting looking at 4 photographs of him actually grinning at me. And when he passed away, his last words to me, I phoned him up. I didn't know they were going to be his last words. And they were pretty much his last words to anyone. And I said, I'd just been at an event that they had sung the song from Wicked, I am who I am because of you. And I said it to him. I didn't sing it to him. I don't really sing. And I said to him, I am who I am because of you. And I love you. And I thought he was going to say, I love you too. And I phoned up to give this message to my sister, and she wasn't there. And she said, just phone Dad, just phone Mum, and she'll give Dad the phone. And he was in bed, and he couldn't speak really. And she held the phone to his ear. And he took this great big deep breath, and you could literally hear the effort it was taking from his soul, because he knew they were his last words. And his last words were to me, and I thought he was going to say, I love you, because he did. But I knew that he didn't have to say that. He wanted to say something to me that I would never forget, that would bring a quality to my life. And I could feel him thinking it. I could feel him thinking, what diamond can I give her? And he said, well done. Now, I didn't know that I grew up thinking I had to be the first, the best, the highest, the longest, whatever it was that you're competing in, you know, the thing that's Daddy's going to be the proudest of me is if I, and we don't even know there's a thing in there. And when he said, well done, it was as if he crowned my life to that point. And in that moment, I just pressed pause and I sat back, and I was staying somewhere. And the story of how I got to be in the room I was in is another whole thing, but trust me, it was something bigger than us at work. And in the room that I was in was a picture on the wall of a girl sitting on a mountainside and eagles flying in front of her. And before I had left for this trip, I'd said to Dad, he said, I want to watch you present. And I said, oh, you do. You'll be a fly on the wall. Actually, no, you won't be a fly on the wall. You'll be a bird. And I said, what are you going to be? Like a robin or a thrush or what would you be? Like something in my garden. And he went, an eagle. And he was a pilot, and flying meant more to him than anything. And he pointed, he went, look. And on the wall were his wings from being in the Royal Air Force. And he was actually in the Royal Canadian Air Force. That's where he was trained as well. He got in, he was in the top 30 that got into Canada. And it was the big story of his life. And there was me in this room, not knowing that I'd spoken to my dad. And the last words he'd said to me were, well done. And there I was in this room with this picture of this girl sitting on the mountain with this eagle. There's four of them actually, but this particular eagle flying. And he was there. When I presented, he was there with me. There's no question. I even sat there and went, I know you're here. And we had this stupid conversation. Now, before I appreciate this is like another realm. This isn't very scientific of me, but the qualitative knowing was beyond instinct and intuition. It was something else. And the nearest I can get to that knowing is gnosis, but with a G. The sense that the energy field of my father granting this quality to everything I did gave me such a vivid sense of being that I sat in complete stillness for hours and hours and hours on end. Mm-hmm. And this is the paradox, so moved, so deeply and profoundly moved. It touched every cell of me and every dot of moment that I've been alive and will be alive. Not one moment of my life was unaffected by that sequence of events. Deeply ingrained with my whole family, of course, but it's that. And that quality, that qualitative knowing has got nothing to do with quantity, scientific analysis, but it's real to me. It's my experience.
Yeah.
And I think we're reaching a stage where we are feeling people that are passing over from this vicious disease. And at the same time, we're hearing stories like dolphins in the canals in Venice, in Italy. People coming out, on a Thursday night outside my house, the kids are all out there setting fireworks off in the gardens. They're banging because we're revering our medical staff and our carers and our volunteers and our servers who serve from the heart qualitatively. And we are revering them with qualitative responses in a world where the quantity of money that you earn is like, well, what are you doing with it to make a difference is the question we're asking now. What are you doing with that money to make a difference? How much can you give? How much can we balance? How can we redistribute the energies? How can we redistribute the tension compression to make the wholeness whole? Because we are all one species. You know, we don't have frontiers. There's no frontiers in here. There's no parts. There's just a whole with distinctions. And that's qualitative. And I think one of the reasons we're having so much difficulty making biotensegrity make sense in the world, and it's beginning to now, and people like you guys are holding on to it, and we need that that intelligence that you bring, without us all saying the same thing. You've got a different body, you've got a different history, you've got a different experience, you bring a different quality to the table.
Yeah, that story, Joanne, is so incredibly powerful, and
Thank you for listening. I don't know why I didn't know I didn't know it was going to come out.
I think it's the most relevant thing, and what Kaila was talking about with the presence, that this whole event is a call to presence, that element of fullness that makes us human, that element of it's almost like the presence coming in and filling us up is tapping into an aspect of humanity that may have been, you know, a layer underneath that went unnoticed because production was so much more important, or scientific validations was more important, or intellectual understandings was more important, and this simple, raw, humble humanity that this is what people are valuing now. You know, it's just
but we always did. I mean, I'm not being funny. It was like this, Christine, and then all that happened was we're suddenly called into an emergency.
Yes.
Emergency, just saying. And our emergent properties, you know, we talk about that all the time, and look what happened. It was already there. We are fed up with having our ways explained to us extraneously, as if the explanation makes sense. It doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, we say so. And our heroes are now these extraordinary, and I mean extraordinary, people, a number of whom are women. I'm not saying they all are. I'm not being sexist about this. I don't have that. But Ellen DeGeneres, Liz Gilbert, Oprah Winfrey, you know, Glennon Doyle, Brene Brown, vulnerability. She got her PhD in vulnerability. I mean, and we're reading this stuff and we're quoting them, and there's loads. Whoever I've left out, I'm sorry. You know, my own teachers, Carolyn Mace, Vanda Scaravelli, Ida Rolf, amazing women. And please, you know how much I revere the men and the scientists that I've worked from: John Sharkey, Stephen Levin, Graham Scarr, Leonid Blyam, my colleague Wilbur Kelsick, who you know, who's in Canada, where you guys are. Whoever I've left out, I'm so sorry. I love you, you know I do. It's the combination of this unwillingness to say, well, the science is it, and impose that or wield that. What we're saying is, what difference can we make? How can we have not a map? How can we acknowledge the territory that is all of us? And Carolyn Mace has just been doing a program called Reflections about the Phoenix rising and mythology, and the map of mythology, or the lens of mythology that we're seeing this current change through. And it's very powerful. I mean, she's extraordinary. And some of the distinctions that she brings to the table are so empowering. And one of the things she talked about a little while ago, I think I did something on Facebook about it, was the grace of endurance. The grace of endurance, just saying it like that, the grace of endurance. And I know that recently there was a thing that Michelle Obama was talking about, where people were asking her to stand for the presidency. And she said, no, you've come out, you do it, you do the work, you come and stand for yourself. And this is the thing, is this paradox of, can we stand for ourselves in such a way that it isn't about me, it's my kids. We're tomorrow's food, we're just the carpet they tread on. But can we make them so much more rounded characters. Have you got children, Kaila?
I do, yeah.
How many?
2, 17 and 19.
Are they boys, girls?
One of each.
One of each. Because Christine and I both have sons who we're both stupid proud of, aren't we?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, don't even get started. How much of our energy as parents, and thank God they're not tots, that we're self-educated. Oh my God, if I had to do homeschooling with my son, I just, God love him. He trained me. I mean, for goodness sake. But it would be, whatever stage we're at, my heart goes out to all the teachers, all the mothers, fathers teaching their kids. I heard in my neighbours yesterday in the garden, he was creating an obstacle course for his kids and timing them, and oh my God, it was just listening to heaven. It was listening to heaven. And one of my girlfriends said to me this morning, this is going to be the time when our children remember that time when mummy and daddy were home, hopefully for some of them. And it was so amazing. We had their undivided attention. And I know there are some places where people are just struggling in the fact that they're imposed on each other. I know that we've got everything, but that's what life's about. It's about the everything.
Mm-hmm.
How we manage this and how we manage this morphing. And biotensegrity is about morphology. It's about shape. And every shape has an archetype. And it's about the moving archetypes of shapes and shape-shifting. And we are being called to shape-shift very rapidly and adapt very rapidly. And the grace of adaptation and the grace of resilience and the grace of endurance to transform.
You know, I think that's, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you didn't.
I think that's where some of this stress is actually coming from.
Yeah.
As you're speaking, I'm like, oh, okay, so as some of us, not everybody in this particular pandemic, but so many people are being asked to slow down. That's there, right? There's a asking to slow down. Yeah, and so what happens when we slow down? Oh, all of a sudden there's an intimacy with myself that starts to come forward. Something, right, becomes like I become more aware of myself in some way. And that can be uncomfortable, right? That can be either an opportunity for some, depending on what that relationship is to begin with. And for others, that can be like yeah, no thanks, or not quite ready, or how do I do that? How do I become intimate with myself? And then there's that other part, which is the presence. And what you talked about, Joanne, I was thinking the witness, what it is to be seen, the witness, what it is to be seen. And these two go hand in hand, right? With helping us have this kind of harmony and sense of ease and inner spaciousness and feeling okay, like what it is to feel okay. I'm intimate with myself. I can meet myself. I can inquire with myself. I am met by another. I'm seen by another. I'm held by another. I can do the same and reciprocate for that for someone else. I see you. I'm here.
I see you.
Yeah.
I see you. And you know, I was talking about this, oh my goodness me, yesterday. I mean, I'm probably quite a bit older than both of you. I'm 92 next week. And joking, it's the yoga I said, but anyway, I'm probably quite a bit older than you. And you think somewhere in your mind that when you're old enough, you've got it worked out. And I travel relentlessly, and sometimes I just don't feel I've got time to catch my breath. I daren't say to somebody when I finish teaching one weekend in a country that I can't teach the following weekend in another country, because I need 10 days to get into a landing pattern and just experience what I experienced there and learn from it. It's like, no, if I'm needed somewhere, I go. And you end up concertinaing your experience of the experience till they gather up, and you're just kind of spitting off the top. And for me, being asthmatic, which is why I learned yoga and why I learn what I learn, is to help myself. It comes from experience. It doesn't come from being so damn smart. I already knew, for God's sake. And this weekend, there was nothing I had to do. I mean, there's loads I had to do. There's loads I had to do, but there was nothing that I just thought, this Sunday, I'm going to do Sunday. And the stillness, I didn't know what to do with it. Everything you just said, Kaila, I didn't even know what it was. I was like looking around. I lost the dog. I lost my dad. My mum is completely safe where she is in a care home, being looked after and loved, and she's aware. And my sister is fine, and my brother-in-law is fine, and my son, and everybody that's really, and then all my friends, I kind of knew where they are and was in touch with them. And there was and I just stood there. And the sun was shining, and my garden's beautiful, and I just went outside and I sat in the sun. And I was thinking, well, what's this? What, am I happy? Am I sad? What now? What now? It was like, what now? What's going on? What's happening? And I started hearing this family creating this obstacle course at the back of the garden and the next garden. And I just thought, well, this is presence. And then I realized what you've called intimacy. I thought, hang on a second. I've been looking for something really special. I keep looking for that super special, extraordinary moment, where the flash of light comes out of the sky and I'm enlightened and all that. Mm-hmm. And the truth about enlightenment, in my not very humble opinion, is that you just get a bigger torch and a bigger broom to find more shit and clear it up. Mm-hmm. And I just sat there and I thought, Joe, this is being. Hello. I just started giggling out loud in the garden. It was so comical because for all that we talk about it, it was like, this is how it feels. There's nothing there. It's ordinary. Mm-hmm. And it's like a piece of music. If you don't play the pauses right, that it's fabulous in the Karate Kid, the modern Karate Kid, where he has to put his coat on the hook and that he doesn't realize that's training him how to do what he's do. Oh, it's the most brilliant movie. And they both are, but that one I love the most because he says to his little friend, you have to play the pauses. Mm. And I actually think if we have a pandemic prior to COVID-19 is this busyness. Yes. And I've meditated since I was 16. I was taught transcendental meditation at 16 and I've always done it. And thank God, because I dig deep, I meditate a lot and then I expect a great deal of myself. And what I realized was that the in-betweenness of the nothingness, of the okayness, of the very ordinary, oh look, there's time to listen to this family in the garden. I couldn't but, or listen, I put my earphones in and listen to something after a while, or listen to the birds because I can hear them. And then I looked at the blue of the sky, it had no chemtrails in it. And all these things, each one started to get fatter in my seeing. Yes. Time, the moments got fat. They were fat moments, not thin moments like me rushing through an airport and cramming all the moments together so that I get to the plane on time. These were fat moments. They were like great big huge fat moments. Mm-hmm. And it was just sitting with that ordinary, I don't even know, you could call it what you like. And I can actually feel it. Wilbur once said to me, actually said to a whole group, Wilbur Kelsey, he said, stress to a human is like sunlight to a plant. And I agree with him to an extent, because it strengthens us. That's where we get our endurance. But one of the strains, one of the inappropriate, unnecessary strains on human beings, I think, is what you called productivity and the urge to achieve and the anything other than here bit. Yeah. And it's like, because we're made of this kind of a structure, it will always pull us back home. This is home. Now, how can I be at home here? And we are being called upon to ask that question. How can I be at home here now? And again now. And again now. and again now, and now,
Mm-hmm.
and again now. And we're literally being invited to reinvent ourselves moment by moment and relinquish the compressive weight of thinking that we are a way, and that's how we are, and we always are that way. There's no always. There's no, otherwise we'd be dead. We'd be finished. While we're alive, we're in this constantly changing amorphic mixture with the fascial fabric, the magical fascial fabric that's under tension at all times everywhere, is morphing us. And by morphing one thing, I mean, I've got the most amazing model here. This is I love this one. Graham Scarr made this for me. And it's got not enough tension in it. Can you see? It's collapsed because it arrived in the post broken. This bar is broken. So it sort of hangs like that. And I thought, oh, you know, it's broken. And I rang Graham and I said, oh, I'm really sorry, could you make me another one? And he said, yeah, of course, because he's so lovely. And then I thought, hang on a minute. And I put a tube of stuff around the end of it. And then I tried to mend it with my hands. Now look what happens when I just put that one stick back. Can you see how the tensional integrity returns to the whole structure? I don't know if you can appreciate that.
So much.
But what I'm changing is that one stick.
Yeah.
I'm not touching anything else. So the wholeness hasn't been destroyed, and it is broken in one place. But the tensional integrity is somewhat compromised, but it's through the whole structure to a greater or lesser extent. The resonance of the whole structure has been changed. And when you mend, which of course the body is to an extent within limits, a self-repairing system, it mends the whole structure. Can you see how differently that now resonates? It now resonates at a different frequency. And what this tells us is that actually we can work on one aspect and it will change everything else.
And you know what I propose that to be in the tensional or the emotional tensegrity that
Yeah, yeah.
you were talking about, Christine?
Yeah.
I propose that to be being.
Yeah.
Being.
I do. Yeah, the practice of being.
Yeah.
The practice of returning home, coming back again, whether it's within a single breath, whether it's in a moment of sitting in a garden and